Welcome to the Lead Defend podcast, a show designed to help you grow in faith and leadership as you navigate the stages of young adulthood. We address important faith topics and provide practical life tips, helping you build up your faith as you engage a changing culture. Now, here are your hosts.
Hey, this is Ryan and Brock here with Lead Defend. Today, we have Steve Ellis with us. Brock, tell us about Steve.
Steve is the executive pastor of missions and church planning here at our church at First Baptist Rogers. We've gotten to have a few of our staff members on, which was great. And so, Steve, thanks for being on today. Talk to us a little bit about Living Sent. He comes from a strong missions background through the IMB. And so, Steve, would you just tell us a little bit about that, how your maybe relationship with Christ started, and then the various roles that you've served in over the years?
Sure. I came to faith in Christ when I was 18 years old. Honestly, came from a family where there was really no believers, first believer in my family. And it was actually through my best friend's sister, who is a pastor's wife in Oklahoma, that I first heard the gospel at 18 years of age. And of course, upon my first encounter with the gospel, it just rocked my world. And I kind of just was under deep conviction for about 2 weeks, just kind of reflecting on my life, and God just kind of did the perfect storm in terms of others He brought into my life to really confirm that this is a decision I need to make. So I made that decision when I was 18, and within just a few months, I went off to like Super Summer, Missouri, and then I went to Falls Creek with the church over in McAllister, Oklahoma. We went down to Falls Creek, and it was there where I just kind of began to sense like, man, something's going on in my life. Didn't know what was going on, but I had some counsel from the pastor, and I said, maybe the Lord is, like calling you into the ministry, and you just need to make yourself available. And I thought, that doesn't sound like me. I don't know that I want to do that kind of scenario. But 3 nights it happened, and finally on the 4th night I went forward, and I said, I'm not sure what all this means, but I think God wants me in the ministry, and so I'm here basically saying, here's my life, use me, and the peace of God returned to my life. And so that kind of set me in motion to take that next step, to go off to school, to prepare for the ministry. And
from knowing kind of a little bit about your history, like God certainly has used you, and we're blessed to be a part of what He's doing to continually use you here. And so would you just mention maybe a few of the things that God did to get you to where you are now? What are the ways that He used you, and how did He kind of bring you into that process?
Well, sure. I would say, obviously, college was a big help in preparation. I went to a Christian college in Dallas, and it was there where I got exposed to a lot of missionaries and mission thinkers, and taking classes in evangelism, other things that would kind of help me know how to share my own faith. And obviously living in Dallas in a very multicultural kind of context, for me it was just like, wow, I grew up here in Southwest Missouri, and there was no other ethnic groups. And being in Dallas, which was just a melting pot of different cultures, it made me fall in love with the people I lived around. And so I wanted to learn how I could really communicate the gospel to them. And so school played a big part, but I would say it was really the investment of a youth pastor in my life. And it was a guy that I got to know in Oklahoma. He was also a student there. We became roommates, and honestly, for me, it was just the life on life, living together, pouring into me, taught me more, one, about discipleship and my walk with Christ, and how to live in obedience to His commands, and doing ministry in context to a local church, loving lost people, sharing my faith. All those things came out of that relationship. But then there was other things. So short-term mission trips also played a part too.
It's amazing, though, how college can foster that environment. Steve, a lot of our students are college students now. How would you encourage them to use their college years to just prepare for whatever God has for them next?
Well, I would say in my own life, I wasn't real clear exactly what the Lord wanted for me. So when I went off to prepare for ministry, I didn't know if I would be a pastor, a youth pastor, a worship pastor.
And now you're an executive pastor. Now, what does executive mean?
Oh, my.
You wear a 3-piece suit every day to work?
Absolutely not. Not since my days in the professional world in Dallas while I was doing graduate school, but nothing like that. But I would say for me, the big turning point for me was that I was just real open. Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Wherever you want me to go, I will go. It's just being available, basically writing a blank check and saying, Lord, you put this on the map somewhere, I want to obey
I got to
you.
warn you, college students don't know what checks are these days.
Well,
That's
it
just
is
handing your debit card number over and saying spend what you want.
Exactly.
A blank cash
Not just your debit
a blank
card, but give them
Venmo.
your PIN number as well.
Okay.
Because God's going to cash it in, And that's what happened to me. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm available. I'll do whatever, go wherever. And really it was the influence of probably an old name. Probably young people won't know this name, but Henry Blackaby. But he came to our school and shared about doing pioneer church planting. And he was primarily thinking about the Pacific Northwest, but I thought, pioneer church planting, I mean, that's kind of a novel idea. You mean there are places in the world where the gospel and where the church didn't exist? I mean, I just had that kind of naivety in school, and I thought, that's something I would like to do. I'd like to take the gospel. I'd like to go and plant a church where it's never been done before.
Wow.
And so I went to the office, the mission office of the school, was like, hey, wherever you're going next in the world, sign me up. This is what I want to be a part of. And so I went and I spent a summer in Brazil. And it was through that first experience after I completed my sophomore year in college that I clearly sensed God calling me into missions.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of college students, they're maybe at a secular state school context, and there's not exactly anything overseas. Is more just studying abroad. It's not necessarily a mission trip. Now, lucky thing with students that are going to say BCM at U of A, you guys do mission trips together.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also some opportunities that I think a lot of people don't even realize are available to them. If there's a college student, or maybe it's even an older high school student who is listening right now and was like, I want to put that blank check on the table, but I don't even know where the table is. What are some opportunities maybe through churches or even our own convention of churches through the SBC that students would have an opportunity to do something like that?
I think there are a lot of avenues, and I think the first place that I would encourage everyone to pursue would just be through their local church. I know that no two churches are exactly the same. Right. Some of your larger churches probably have, far more, outlets and opportunities to serve locally, nationally, and globally. But just check with them to seeing if they have potentially anything that would enable them to actually kind of be a sent one, so to speak, to go and share the gospel in a place that's totally unfamiliar to you. Another place would be, even checking through your state convention to see what opportunities might be available for, like in the past, we used to have like international world changers. You could go as a high school student, that kind of thing. The International Mission Board has a number of programs, for people to go and serve for a semester or for a year or for 2 years, that kind of thing. And it's just connecting with the right people that can give you the introductions to possible locations where they can serve. Yeah. But that's what I would encourage people to do.
Steve, your journey has really taken you a lot of places. You've served in several countries throughout the world, Southeast Asia particularly. But then you also had the privilege of kind of coaching up and leading a vast region of missionaries who are serving in a lot of places. Could you speak to students wherever they are in their journey? What are the things that if they know the Lord's calling me to missions that they can do now that can prepare them for lifetimes of faithfulness?
For sure. Yeah, we had the privilege of serving for 27 years with the International Mission Board in Cambodia, Thailand, and in Taiwan. So about 14 years focused on Southeast Asian peoples, predominantly Buddhist animist peoples, and then 13 and a half years in leadership for the work in East Asia, primarily focused on Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans. And so, during those years, we had a very ambitious student strategy, partnerships, that we were helping to facilitate and fuel a whole student movement, that could go and serve, in different places. So my perspective, for years and years was looking at it from the field back to the local church.
Sure.
But for the last 2.5 years, I've served here on staff at First Baptist Rogers, and it's given me a completely different perspective from this side. And one, it's helped me to try to evaluate the depth of our missional awareness and understanding. I mean, are people, we say that we're missions minded, but are we really missionally engaged? I mean, are we really involved more than just kind of the praying and paying side of things, giving our tithes and offering up a few prayers, but then outsourcing missions to the professional missionaries. And so I think that's where I'm coming in thinking this is something that I really want to try to influence and change even within our own church. And so what's helped has been doing mission studies. And so doing basic to intermediate to advanced, level mission studies to take people through what God's word has to say about, hey, there's a biblical basis as to why we do the things that we do. Yeah. God's passionate about a lost world, and he's given a commission to his church to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Mm-hmm. And then what does it mean for us? Well, it kind of falls into these realms of we do need to be praying. We do need to be giving. We do need to be senders. We need to be goers. We need to be supporters. Mm-hmm. We need to welcome the nations that have moved into our neighborhoods. These are people that are in the workplace and the marketplaces that we can be impacting right here. So start where you are. Look for outlets to serve these communities of internationals that have moved, into your area. If it's an international exchange student, if it's another international that is working for your company, there's a lot of opportunities there to impact them right here in those areas.
Yeah, because if you're a college student thinking about this, depending on where you are, you might be in one of the most diverse places you'll ever be.
Absolutely.
In the United States in your life, with all the transfer students that are coming in, international students coming in. On your hallway, on your dorms are likely people from other countries with different backgrounds that before you have to go overseas and get on a plane, you just got to walk down the hallway and knock on the door. But when it comes time to take that trip, Steve, if I'm putting my mind in the maybe average college student mindset and they're thinking, man, I've got a summer, school's coming up, I know that tuition, I really need to work to make money. What is my incentive? Why should I look at giving this summer away to go spend overseas? Or maybe it's they're about to graduate and they know that their mom and dad are thinking, hey, you need to put that degree to good use. And at the same time, they're carrying, hey, should I look at something like the Journeyman program where we go to spend a year? Help that student think through, why is it worth giving up that summer? Why is it potentially worth giving up those 2 years to go and serve overseas?
Well, I could tell you what influenced me. And honestly, it was one passage of Scripture in Psalm 9:17 that says, the wicked should be turned into hell along with all the nations that forget God.
Wow.
And so the fact is when it says nations, it's the same kind of word and terminology we use for people groups. And when it says, forget there, it's not that these people have put God out of their minds. It is a word which means to be oblivious of. They have no memory, of Jesus, So there are vast populations, people groups throughout the world that have never one time heard the gospel. I think that was my driving motivation to consider how I should use my summers and even my time, after college, as we were kind of prayerfully thinking about when we should go. We had the call in college, and I think we were anxious to immediately move out and get somewhere on the mission field. But, there was more preparation that needed to be done. We continued to take short-term trips. But it's about 9 years from the point that we felt a call into missions to the time that we actually landed as full-time career, missionaries, in Cambodia. And so I always say, if your life is the length of your arm, a 2-week trip is maybe the length of a finger, and 2 years of your life is maybe the length of your hand. And what is that in context, basically, to the length of your entire arm? 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. It's really nothing. And maybe right now you don't see the potential value in terms of how that could enrich your experience and your involvement through your local church. But at the same time, entering into that, it could be the very thing that God uses to maybe call you out to do this on a long-term basis.
That's huge. Could you help us define a couple things, Steve? Like, how should a student even think of missions? What is missions?
Well, missions is basically it's the mandate of God. I think of it in terms of His Great Commission that you see in Matthew 28, 18 through 20. You see it in Mark 16, 15, Luke 24, 45 through 47, John 20, 21, Acts 1, 8. Look all those passages up. They're all about the Great Commission. And it's all about a mandate He's given to His church to take the gospel, okay, to people who have never heard. So you go, you make disciples, and you make disciples by doing, three things, okay? You go, you baptize, and then you basically train these people up to obey, his commands. So I know sometimes when people think about missions, they group a lot of things into missions. It's not really missions.
Right. Sure.
You can't have missions that is completely divorced from the gospel. It's all about the gospel and everyone having access to the gospel. And so, I have made it my life, purpose that whatever I do, wherever I go, I want to make sure that I'm living out the values of the gospel.
Wow.
And living with gospel intentionality so that wherever I am and whoever I'm with, I am going to live it out and I'm going to speak it, because that's the only way that faith can come.
So you're drawing a line. Missions can involve things like service projects.
They can.
And outreach, but things like service project and outreach in and of themselves, just simple benevolent goods, social goods, isn't missions necessarily.
I look back at the tsunami that happened in Indonesia,
Wow.
and 25,000 people who lost their life, and spending, 18 months of our life down in areas where we're ministering to families that lost, loved ones. And we were building homes, we were helping with livelihood projects, we were feeding, we were digging well. You do all these other kinds of projects, but I don't want anyone to go to hell with a full stomach, and have their thirst satisfied, but never hear the gospel. And so, you can do all those things, and they might be an effective bridge and an entry strategy to get into places that need the gospel, but they've got to hear the gospel. We got to share it.
Yeah. Steve, I've seen a lot, especially as earlier you were talking about pioneer missions, which again, for those who may not know the terminology, you kind of define that as establishing churches and sending the gospel to be a presence where a place that there is currently a gospel presence. There's some pushback to that today. The assumption that we're really what that is just some type of colonization effort, that it is imposing Western culture, Western ideals, Western beliefs, and really infiltrating these other people groups. And my guess is there's a lot of college students that are confronted with that. Who are we as Christians to impose our religious beliefs on others? Help a college student reconcile those ideas. What do they say to the person who looks like the young man who I think a couple years ago entered into
North Sentinelese,
and ended up losing his life, and they said, well, he deserved it. What business did he have doing there? How do we think about these things? How do we answer those questions?
Well, one, I would say that, there is certainly a cost, okay, in terms of taking the gospel to people who've never heard.
Yeah.
And we would typically say that, all the low-hanging fruit have been plucked. And so a lot of the remaining groups that need the gospel.
They're remaining for a reason.
They're remaining for a reason. They're hard to get to. They're isolated. They're remote. They're in really difficult areas, both politically, religiously. You're not going to get a missionary stamp in your visa to go to those places, okay? And so when you go to those places that you've got to really count the cost, before you go. And so, yes, I think in the past, historically, we've done missions and we've made a lot of mistakes. And I can see where some people can kind of pick up that because of some of those past mistakes and some of the colonization efforts, there were some who did it a wrong way. But that's certainly not the way that we're doing missions today. And so I would tell people basically that we go and we are there as learners.
Yeah.
We are there to become incarnational in the same ways that Jesus was when he entered into this world. There was 30 years of preparation before he ever entered into ministry for a 3-year period. And he learned language, he learned culture, he developed those relationships and those connections, not to change those people, because you're going to find yourselves, as much being changed, by those cultures. But you are there, though, to basically share that there is a biblical kind of culture that transcends and it really overrides the local culture. So where those local cultural customs are in conflict to what the Word of God says, then there's a responsibility to teach and to reinforce some of those beliefs.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, Steve, have this assumption. They're called to ministry or missions, or they have a desire for that, and they say, okay, there's a lot of things, I'm just going to figure it out when I get over there. What are the things you would encourage now for a person called to ministry or missions to start implementing in their life right here so that they can be faithful down the road?
Well, I believe that it's really the local church in many ways that is the equipping kind of center for people who want to engage as a sent one. Because I see two things. I mean, the church is a sender. The missionaries are the sent ones that are sent out from the local church. And I think you see that model in Acts 13, with Barnabas and Saul. When the Spirit of God said, set apart for me, Saul and Barnabas, for the work that I've called them to. And so that's critical. And so I think, one, prepare yourself. I mean, see if there are opportunities to do mission studies inside the local church. Get plugged into the ministries of that local church that's primarily focused, on people groups, that look and act very differently from you. And so, I mean, if you're thinking about going somewhere in the Spanish-speaking world, get engaged with some kind of Hispanic ministry, here locally. So you're not going to do overseas what you're not doing here locally. And so I think that you've got to cut your teeth. You've got to develop, your competency and confidence doing ministry here in a stateside context. Now, does all that experience translate, once you get overseas? Not always, but it is good preparation for you as you go. Another key thing is really learn how to share your faith. I think in all my years, serving with the mission board, one of the things that holds people up more so than anything else is that they don't have an active, witnessing kinds of experience in terms of sharing their faith. And so sometimes for months on end, they're having to keep, witnessing logs of every kind of spiritual conversation anytime that they're sharing the gospel to just get them into that kind of practice and mindset of doing that. So if you don't know how to share your faith, then they're look to people who are good at doing it. So you could be mentored, or somebody could give you some coaching, get some different tools. I mean, I think much in the same way that if I went out to build a house, I would have a tool belt with a lot of different kinds of tools. You need lots of different kinds of tools to reach lots of different kinds of peoples. And so learn some of those tools, practice using those tools. Those are going to be really helpful things for you as you go.
Let's flip that question. You've spoken to the person saying, what should I do now? I'm sure some of the things relate, but if you had a chance to speak to the leaders of those people, what would you be telling those leaders of, hey, here's how here are the things that you can do to equip this next generation? Or what would you say to them about even calling out the next generation?
Well, I think it is definitely helpful when you have a pastor who is very missions-minded and is constantly, through his messages, pointing to the gospel and pointing to the need of the gospel among unreached peoples. And so that's going to be very helpful, because I think things will rise or fall with those that are in leadership in the local church. So when they have to buy in, and they need to be real intentional. I don't think that this is just something that happens haphazardly, because many times the student may not seek that person out on their own. Yeah. So they need to be real intentional about trying to create that infrastructure to help equip and prepare them for this work. And so I think there needs to be a lot of communications even between the different ministries in a local church, that as they hear about somebody that is sensing a call to do this, let's work on a developmental plan to get them through, the various stages to get them to the point that we can take the lead as a church in being able to send them abroad.
That's huge. Well, Steve, what is the thing that you would say to a young person who they're like, I don't know if I'm called to ministry or missions, but I'm here right now. And what would you have me do? What would the Lord have me do?
Well, I have had opportunities to talk to students at college campuses before, and even when I begin to talk about, God's purpose for your life, sometimes, they're like deer in the headlights, I mean, they don't even know what life is going to be next week or in 2 weeks or a month, and to get them to think
just
about
to
their lifetime,
finals.
Get through finals, They don't think that way, and obviously, I mean, I'm 60, so I'm in a different generation.
You look real good for 60.
Thank you, but I don't know. I didn't want to waste my life. Yeah. Okay, and so it's important to me if I was going to live on purpose, it would be helpful for me to know the direction that God was leading me, so that I could prepare and equip myself, that way. And so I think really trying to discover, what that purpose is, and then just passionately pursuing that, with your whole heart and bringing other people kind of alongside you to help fan that flame, for you to fulfill, the purpose that God has for you.
Wow.
You came to faith at age 18, and it was because somebody shared the gospel with you.
That's right.
How would you encourage young people to just be intentional with their time now, sharing the gospel with peers?
Well, you just have to do it. I'll say, typically the way that we would look at this kind of in a missions context, that we typically try to find persons of peace where we have no believers. Mm-hmm. But once we have believers, the objective is to try to transition your evangelism approach to oikos evangelism, working within your network of pre-existing relationships to share the gospel. And so, you have friends, you have family, you have neighbors, you have coworkers, okay?
Yeah.
There are people that you hang out with, there are people that you play with, there are people that where you do your shopping. So you've got various networks of relationship that God has primarily positioned you to be missional, okay?
Yeah.
You're now the missionary that needs to go to those different mission fields. These are relationships that you possess. You will probably have as much likelihood as anyone else in being able to impact those relationships.
Yeah.
And so just be intentional. Pray for them. Pray for their salvation. But also, we encourage people, pray for, one, open hearts. The second is to pray for open doors of opportunity.
Sure.
You're praying for God to create those divine appointments for you to have that spiritual conversation. But the other thing that I tell people too, you pray for open mouths, because God can open a heart and God can open a door, but if you don't open your mouth to share the gospel, it won't make a bit of difference. And so open your mouth, share the gospel. And I guarantee you that if you get into the practice of praying and being intentional about reaching out to your pre-existing networks of relationships and sharing, you're gonna see fruit, a lot of fruit.
And I appreciate you saying that. Just do it, because over the last 2 years, I think I've been trying to really look, especially at relational evangelism and sharing the gospel with those around you, and as like you're looking for every opportunity to make it as less awkward as possible and as least confrontational. And certainly there are good ways to share the gospel and there are bad ways to share the gospel. There's even wise ways to share the gospel and we might say less than wise, unwise ways to share the gospel. But at some point, you've got to share the gospel. And at some point, the gospel confronts. And so there's only so much we can do before we have to say, you know what, it's just time to share.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get so caught up in getting everything, saying everything right.
Perfectly
the
right.
The Lord will bless your obedience. The thing that's been so convicting to me, there are so many people on the college campus I serve that are one conversation away from making a decision to trust Jesus.
Wow.
Like if only somebody would have that conversation with them. And so, Steve, I appreciate you just encouraging folks in that. Steve, what final word would you give to people?
Well, I think to this very point, one of my life verse, my life verse, I would say, is Philippians 1:27. And it talks about let your conduct be such that it adds value and brings distinction to the gospel. And so, one, that is going to influence the way that you live out your life around these relationships. You want your message to be speaking, or your life message to be speaking the same as your verbal witness.
Yeah.
And I think those two things together, when they sing that the reality, of Christ transforming power has really changed your life. This is something I want for myself. It'll do what God has intended, for it to do. It has power to transform people's lives, and so I pray to that end that will happen with you.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for being on with us. Lead Defend is always around the corner, so you can go to leaddefend.org for more information on the event. But thank you so much for listening.
That's it for this episode of Lead Defend. To hear more episodes from the Lead Defend crew, visit absc.org/podcasts. If you liked what you heard, rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening site. Want to learn more information about the next Lead Defend conference? Visit leaddefend.org.